Okay, so I've got my motor mount onto the bottom of my engine. If you were building this, you've already applied your thread locker. It's got the death grip applied to it. Everything's torqued down and ready to go in. So now at this point, it's time to load our clutch on and our fan assembly. Or is it? If you are not running a crank pin sensor for your governor and you're going to be installing magnets on here, there's a critical step we're going to show real quick. I'm not going to go into all the details, but we need to do. We need to balance this assembly. Even if you're not, if you're still using the crank pin pickup, you still need to balance this assembly as it sits right here with its 2 bolts. A lot of times, depending if you have the clutch shoe this way or this way, you'll find that it favors one side or the other in a balance. So we're going to do that real quick. Okay, so I've got my Dubro part number 499 prop balancer out, also used for wheels and clutch hubs and everything else. So I've just arbitrarily placed this together and mounted on the balancer. You'll notice I've already got these holes aligned where the bolt holes are, so this clutch shoe is in relatively close proximity where it's going to rest in the build. So I've just put this on here. I'm going to go to slight spin. Okay, right there is where you see it. It has a heavy side, so I bump that. It's kind of rocking back and forth. So heavy sides on the bottom. We're going to mark this with a Sharpie. Actually, we'll mark it with a Sharpie. Then we're going to come back. We're going to flip the shoe 180 degrees and check it again. Okay, marking with a Sharpie right here, just so we can see this mark. Now I'm going to take the shoe off, or take this off, and I'm going to rotate the shoe 180 degrees to the other alternate position, because you really only have 2 positions you can do on this. Now if you're putting a magnet in here, that also gives you the ability to play around with that. In my case, my birds, I use the Spectrum crankcase sensor. Okay, so there's that black mark again, right there. Let's give this a slight nudge. And notice now it's stopping at a different location. There. So there's the black mark, and there it goes. So it's resting down here. Depending on how you reference this, about the 4 o'clock or the 7 o'clock position. The idea behind this is a rotating mass. You want this thing to be as true as possible. If I am putting this on my ship, I'm going to use a magnetic balancer instead of a mechanical one, and I will get this spot on. This sometimes takes anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours to balance this component. But that time spent, that's the difference between the pros and the amateurs. One final note, once we do get our location of the clutch marked, what I'll come in and do is take a sharp tool and I will scribe a mark in the shoe, and I will scribe a mark in the aluminum clutch hub. That way you know how these two mate up together. On that same note, just to fall deeper into a rabbit hole, show you something here that I discovered in doing this anal retentive balancing of this part. I have kits, in the case of the Pantera, across about 10 different kits across about 4 years of production. So not all the parts are exactly the same. So when I pulled this kit open, and I pulled out, selected 2 of my retaining bolts for the clutch, decided to weigh them. 0.68 gram. 0.66. Pretty close. So I dug around and found another bolt, exact same size, from another kit. 0.75. So the point being here is that there are variations from production run to production run, and if you've got a ton of parts just laying around and you're just randomly grabbing things, might want to be a little more considerate about what you're doing. When you have a rotating mass like this and all of a sudden you have two different weights on here, you just threw the whole thing out of balance again. So depending on how anal retentive you are, just there for FYI. Okay, now down to the true meat and potatoes of this video. So if I've got my engine here at bottom dead center, as I see here, turned around. On this particular engine, I've got a flat spot on the crank on your Hyper 55 or Hyper 50 and 55, so I actually have a keyway. On our collet, we got a split. I, for reference, put that 180 degrees from the flat spot or from where the keyway goes into the crank. So just use that for a reference point. We're going to use that a little later to base our, depending on what sort of problems we have to run out. At this point, we'll go ahead and slip the collet in place onto the crank. So that's in place, basically, like I said, opposite of the keyway. We'll present our clutch assembly. Now, make sure you've already, in my case, this is not going to be an operational, but make sure you go ahead and have your bolts mounted in here to keep that fan assembly in place. It's another thing, when you're balancing, you can play with those for getting the whole clutch. Here's our tapered nut. I'm going to go ahead and insert my crank locking tool. And I will introduce my 10mm deep well ratchet. For the first time on this, you just snug it up, because you never know when you go to Vegas and you get lucky. So I've brought it up, I'm presenting it to it. I'm going to pull onto it a little bit. This is very light, not putting much torque on it. Now she's getting tight. Now I'm going to put the Gorilla Grip on the engine. I'm going to pull that over. Nice and tight. So we're going to throw this into our calibrated vise with our dial indicator on it, and we'll see what sort of run out we get on this.